Comedy is hard. What is funny to some may not be funny to others. What is offensive to some may not be offensive to others.
Brother, this guy stinks!
Comics are often criticized for the nature or implications of their jokes more readily because the artist is delivering the commentary directly to the audience, and the line between what is a joke and their sincere feelings towards a topic is hard to parse out. Yet when it comes to scripted comedy, the audience is often given pause because what is offensive may be a character who is designed to be unlikable. What isn't funny may be the author's attempt at pointing to a larger social phenomenon which is meant to be criticized. It may be satire. Satires are literary works that aim to point out a societal flaw through comedy and exaggeration. It calls attention to an ethical or moral failing within culture. Done successfully, they have the power of both humor and inspiration. Yet just because a work of media calls attention to a societal flaw or even embellishes a moral failing, that work doesn't necessarily qualify as satire. Therefore, that lesser work does not have the ability to mitigate the reproach of its audience in response to its intended offense. Classically, there are elements that qualify a literary work as satire. In these elements, it is easy to determine whether a work is the complex work of satire that points out a moral failing that has the power to mitigate offense and inspire, and the lesser critical work of comedy, which is often known as parody. One of the first traits of satire is irony. Irony is a literary technique in which what appears to be or is expected is contrary to the truth, dramatic irony being the common variety in which the character's actions or intentions are juxtaposed by a reality known by the audience. Another subcategory of irony could be sarcasm, which is essentially verbal irony, which is commonly used in satire. Exaggeration is the technique in which a character or a situation is embellished for comedic effect, usually to show the absurdity of the subject. Exaggeration can also be considered parody. Juxtaposition, or paradox, in which two contrary realities are presented at the same time. Within a satire, one reality is obviously true, but the other reality is commonly held. The obviously true reality is one that points out the ethical moral failure of the false one. Comparison is why two subjects are contrasted to show their difference. Imitation or parody is when a character's or subject's qualities are embellished. Analogy is an element in which one thing is compared to something else as if it is that thing, which is often executed through reversal, in which a character becomes or switches characteristics with something else. And double entendre, when something's meaning has a second implied or hidden indecent or sexual meaning or application. There are other techniques of satire that one may find in popular media and literature, and even classical types of satire in Horatian, Juvenalian, and Menippean, in which different aspects of ethics or morality are challenged. Let's take a look at two contemporary programs which are quite often famously compared to one another in terms of comedic quality. Looking at the entire catalog of both programs, one being a satire and one falling squarely in the category of comedic parody. It may be quite obvious to some which is which, but let's take a look at both to see if they successfully embody the qualities of a satire. These shows are South Park and Family Guy. Irony. Both of these programs use irony regularly to communicate a reality behind what is expected to be true. Exaggeration, or parody, is also commonly used in both programs. Juxtaposition, or paradox, is a tool that is used in both programs to varying degrees. South Park regularly juxtaposes the outrageous realities with the rational in many ways, but primarily through its main characters and most often Kyle and Stan, who represent the rational reality that others, namely Cartman and some wacky townsfolk, are blind to throughout many episodes. This character that acts as a source of reason is a very common character to include in a satire. They speak to the audience directly and often suffer as it is their true reality that is opposed by their environment or the world. Huey Freeman from Boondocks, a satire that was sadly far ahead of its time in terms of its reception, is an example of this character. We also might include Jennifer Lawrence's and Leonardo DiCaprio's characters in Don't Look Up, a more modern satire, as examples. Family Guy, on the other hand, sometimes uses juxtaposition, but because it follows the structure of a traditional animated sitcom, there is no clear reality, but rather from episode to episode, one character or another will have a lesson of the day in which they come to a realization or change of heart concerning the world or themselves. This structure isn't inherently satirical. Both Family Guy and South Park also use comparison to differentiate ideas and subjects. They both thrive in using imitation or parody. They are both known to use analogy in their narratives as well as the reversal. And they both use double entendre quite famously. So on face value, they seem quite the same in that one might consider both to be satire. However, South Park's use of paradox does place it more firmly in satire, as Family Guy's randomness and lowbrow comedic absurdity make it difficult to effectively juxtapose for the audience any clear or real ethical truth. Every character is as, or even more so, blinded to their own hypocrisies as they are capable of moments of clarity. However, there is one element of satire that Family Guy doesn't have that makes it a sitcom of parody rather than a satire. And this is a quality that South Park has in spades, that any true satire must have. And that is to be topical. Satires have to be about or regarding the moral or ethical failures of the time. Family Guy's lessons of the day are primarily situational and do not often, if ever, reflect the current social zeitgeist. South Park, on the other hand, consistently creates episodes that hold a mirror up to society, and specifically American society, in the moment they're released. South Park is a satire. Family Guy is parody, a lesser component of satire. This is why South Park, for all of its offense and indecent absurdity in the name of comedy, is viewed with higher regard as a creative work than Family Guy, although they are both about equally crass. We can apply this framework to another recent show that claims to embody the comedic complexity of satires, but ultimately falls short: Netflix's animated series Good Times. This show, about the fictional grandchildren of the highly regarded family in the live-action Good Times series, fails in terms of most of the aspects of what makes a satire. Although it utilizes parody, imitation, juxtaposition, analogy, double entendre, exaggeration, irony, it, like Family Guy, fails to have a true character acting as a source of reason, which makes it difficult for the audience to identify any moral or ethical failing in society today to critique. And most egregiously, the show is not topical. The show does depict Black culture, even aspects of it today. The Evans family parody the most evil and undesirable aspects of both Afro-American culture and urban life, like gangs, drugs, living in squalor, ignorance, poor health, while also depicting very common stereotypes of Black life. In a time when Black media and Black culture have been actively pushing against these types of depictions in the media while opening up spaces for newer, more nuanced depictions of Black life. Afro-American millennial and Gen Z adults also represent the first generations of Black adults in America that have a full range of career options and representation in every industry. And therefore, the depictions do not necessarily represent the Afro-American experience today, and certainly not their frame of mind around their own representation. This is especially true as the real-life Cabrini Green housing project that the Evans family lived in their fictional world finished being torn down in Chicago in 2010. a city that is becoming increasingly gentrified. Not to mention, the show isn't even topical in its own diegesis. The original Evans family left the projects at the end of the original Good Times show. Netflix's Good Times isn't a satire. It is more of a nostalgic parody of premillennial Black urban life, which is most likely why it failed to deflect much of any of the criticism it received. True satires can be found in programs like Don't Look Up, Boondocks, and Kunk on Earth, closely approached in movies like Idiocracy, and even represented in programs like Black Mirror and American Psycho that aren't objectively funny but are so subjectively through their use of juxtaposition and the characteristics of satire. Satire is a bit more complex than parody, but for all of their differences, they don't detract from the enjoyability of any particular program. You can like South Park and Family Guy, but it is important to know the difference, especially as you consider what is a fair critique of that work, and furthermore, how you enjoy it.